Ever since the Switch 2 was announced, I've been seeing this comment kind of repeatedly. It's buried under the ones that say drop the price or, $80 games. And that is the comment, just buy a Steam Deck. I'm here to tell you that that is just bad advice. So let's get right into it. Hello and welcome. My name is Wolfy. You're watching Lesser Than Cake. And today we are talking about that comment, that oh so omnipresent comment, just buy a Steam Deck instead of a Switch 2. And here's the thing. But Wolfie, I've seen your channel. At this point, you've been talking about nothing but Nintendo. So it makes you think that you can talk about the Steam Deck. I mean, you're obviously a Nintendo fangirl. You really shouldn't talk about something that you just don't know anything about. Okay, I'm going to stop you there. You see, I am actually very qualified to talk about this because I do own a Steam Deck. I own an ROG Ally, and I own the original Switch, along with a pre-order for the Switch 2. When it comes to this kind of thing, I actually do it a lot. I've got a gaming PC that is capable of doing all of this, which is actually pretty difficult to do, along with editing computers that I have built and deployed for countless other people. When it comes to tech, I kind of know what I'm talking about. And gaming tech is like my actual specialty. Not only that, on my main channel, I did a challenge where I ran Linux on a gaming desktop before the Steam Deck even came out to really get familiar with it, to get to know how it all works. And I do have a launch Steam Deck that I have modified with a new hard drive and absolutely love to play. I took it with me on 2 different road trips, even with my ROG Ally. So yes, I do love the Steam Deck. But the problem is, we're comparing 2 very different gaming handhelds. And sadly, it's not a good comparison for the Steam Deck. Let's just go over the specs here really quickly. The Steam Deck has an 800p screen. That is LCD or OLED, depending on the version you get. The comparable version to the price of the Switch 2 is an LCD. Those screens run at 60 and 90 hertz respectively. It comes with 250 gigabytes of internal storage, comes with a case, and can be had for a fairly reasonable amount of money. Now, let's talk about the Switch 2, which has a 1080p screen, which is higher resolution. It is HDR10, which the Steam Deck, unfortunately, is not until you go up into the OLEDs. I think those have HDR certification, or they may not even be HDR certified. But the point is, we have a higher contrast, higher resolution screen. And that screen runs at 120 hertz, which means it is a faster screen. In every regards, the Switch 2 has a better screen than the base LCD Steam Deck. It also has 250 gigabytes of storage, which means that they are at least parity in that regard. And the Switch 2 actually is a fair bit more expensive than the Steam Deck, to the point that I could see that argument. That is until I account for functionality. The Switch 2 is going to be coming with a dock. You have to buy a dock separately for the Steam Deck. And while the Steam Deck dock and the Switch 2 dock are very, very similar down to their outputs and everything, the fact that one has to be purchased for an additional $79 and the other one is free should be taken into consideration. But you do get a case with the Steam Deck, which you don't get with the Switch, so you gotta account for that. And when you do, they are actually only $10 apart. That's right, the increase in price on the Switch 2 case due to tariffs is the difference between them.
Now, in this video, there was a segment right here about the processors and how we really can't compare them too easily. And, well, Nintendo did the unthinkable, and they actually released processor specs. And, I mean, it's interesting because on one hand, it actually definitely looks like the Steam Deck might have the edge in raw processing horsepower, but Nintendo's got some weird stuff into their processing architecture that might make it a better gaming handheld. I know that's going to sound really weird because how can the stronger processor not be the stronger handheld? Let's just kind of talk about it a little bit. So the Steam Deck runs the Zen 2 architecture with RDNA 2 graphics. It is a 4-core, 8-thread processor that runs at anywhere between 2.4 and 3.5 gigahertz. The GPU is an RDNA 2 GPU with 8 CUs, and it runs at about 1 to 1.6 gigahertz. For RAM, there are 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5, which is running at 5,500 megatransfers per second. Now, the Switch 2 has an 8-core ARM Cortex A78C Max that runs at 1.7 gigahertz. Right off the bat, we're looking at two architectures that are very different in their mentality. Zen was designed to be scalable up to almost server level parts, actually up to server level parts, and down to laptops, where the ARM Cortex is scalable up to a laptop. So we're already looking at an architecture difference that is pretty vast in its intent. And the ARM processor is going to be more efficient, but I don't think those 8 ARM cores are going to meet the 4 Zen cores in raw power. I could be wrong, because I don't think we've ever had a chance to benchmark this, because this is such an unusual processor choice. Now, the Switch 2 GPU is also very, very interesting, because we've, again, never really seen it. There is an Ampere GPU from NVIDIA with 1,536 CUDA cores, which is actually very interesting. I am not 100% sure how that compares to the 8 RDNA CUs that are inside of the Steam Deck, but it does sound like this Switch 2 has a lot of GPU horsepower, but not a lot of CPU horsepower. And that might be because, well, doesn't need it. Let's be real. The Switch 2 is going to be running a very light operating system. There are some bits of the system that is actually being reserved. 6 cores are available for game development. 2 cores are being reserved by the system. And then of the GPU, it looks like 100% of the GPU can be used. A lot more detail than Nintendo normally would give us. So it's got 12 gigabytes, but only 9 gigabytes can be used specifically for games. So yeah, and the memory interface is, interestingly enough, 128-bit. That's like quadruple the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck actually runs in 32-bit channels. The Switch 2 is running at 128-bit LPDDR5. So same RAM, slightly lower, higher transfer speed. I don't know how that's going to affect things, because again, this is such a weird architecture that, as somebody who's worked with computers and done GPU reviews, CPU reviews, I don't know. I actually am fascinated by this architecture and these architecture choices. There's also an additional chip that Nintendo is throwing in that is not typical on processors. That is actually a compile and decompile chip. And why that is so fascinating is compile and decompile is actually one of those things that is very, very CPU heavy. One of the ways to test a high-end CPU is to see how good it is at compile and decompile. So by adding a secondary chip, we have absolutely no idea what the actual processing of this SoC is going to be like. And I think Digital Foundry put it best. We're going to have to put the games to their test, and we're going to have to put later games to the test, because some of this hardware may not even be fully utilized at launch. So given the unknowns to the Steam Deck versus Switch debate, I'm going to have to do a video about this on my main channel the second I have both devices in hand, which will not be long now. And so once I do, we'll make sure to test Cyberpunk 2077, which seems to be at least the only equalizer that I can see at the moment that will be able to stress both systems.
Yeah, but the Steam Deck's not exactly about the hardware. It's about the software, being able to run Linux and mod it and, emulate games. Why pay $80 per game if you could just, emulate what you need? Hey, I get it. SteamOS is cool. You can run every Steam game that you've ever purchased, potentially, through SteamOS. But the actual figure is more like 80% of your games are going to run across this console and your PC. And there is a level of nuance and coolness that comes with SteamOS. You could pop into the desktop, you could tinker with it, you can mod. I have played modded Skyrim on my Steam Deck. It is the most fun little handheld I've ever had to do just that. But here's the problem, right? I am a specific kind of gamer who has both a gaming PC, a Steam account with tons and tons and tons of games on it, but also a Nintendo account that also has a lot of games. And the fact of the matter is, if you want to play Nintendo games, you're not going to be playing them on Steam Deck. But hey, I'll tell you, emulation's great. Emulation's cool. You can run Switch 1 games on the Steam Deck. So all you who are watching this might be able to, and I might be able to. Do you think everybody can? Like, seriously, if you've spent any amount of time tinkering with the Steam Deck like I have, do you think the average gamer could go in there and actually do it? Seriously. Ask yourself that question, because I have broken the SteamOS no less than 3 times. I have had to rebuild it 4 times. One time was because I replaced the SSD. So SteamOS isn't exactly stable, it isn't exactly easy, and let's face it, I can hand my Switch to my mother and expect to come back to a perfectly working Switch. I cannot do the same about the Steam Deck. Not to mention, Nintendo is already notoriously draconian when it comes to cracking down on Nintendo accounts that are connected from unsupported hardware or modified hardware. There was just an article that was posted saying that they will brick your Nintendo Switch if they find out that you are using modified hardware and software. That's an extreme punishment. And honestly, a bit much. Imagine if you're trying to play Animal Crossing New Horizons and you're running a modded client and somehow that's connected to your Nintendo account. Like, what does this kill code entail? Could it be worse? Issues with that aside, right? And I'm sure modders will get around it. The truth of the matter is, emulation takes processing power. And while the Steam Deck had that extra processing power, it will not have that processing power for the Switch 2. We've already said the processor is probably better. We already know that the processor is probably better, which means that a faster processor is going to have to be emulated by a slower processor. So Switch 2 games aren't going to show up on the Steam Deck the same way that Switch 1 games did. Additionally, you're also going to have the factor of ray tracing and DLSS. Now, DLSS isn't compatible with AMD hardware. They have FSR, which can emulate it, so there might be a way to make it work. But I don't think if we were to take the Switch version of Cyberpunk 2077 and we take the Steam Deck version of the games, I don't think that you're going to want to play the Switch version instead of the Steam Deck version on your Steam Deck. So while yes, you can emulate on this Steam Deck, you can play 80% of your Steam library, potentially. How applicable is that going to be to the average Nintendo gamer? Not you or me. The people who are watching this and thinking with the Steam Deck in mind, we're not the kind of people who this comment would affect. So then, if the Switch 2 is just so much better of a deal, does that make the Steam Deck irrelevant? Does it make it so that the Steam Deck is now a paperweight waiting for its revision? No. The fact of the matter is, you can still love your Steam Deck. There is a kind of person that the Steam Deck makes more sense than the Switch 2. If you are primarily a PC gamer who has a large Steam library, if you already understand a little bit about Linux and know that not everything's going to work 100% of the time, that there are going to be quirks and you are going to have to tinker with it, but enjoy that aspect of it, the Steam Deck is for you. I fall into that camp where I love my Steam Deck not because it's perfect. Hell, it breaks most of the time. But what I enjoy is tinkering and doing things that I would never be able to do on a traditional console. At the same time, I also am really happy that I have a pre-order for a Switch 2. Because I'm going to be able to play the newest Nintendo games. I'm going to be able to play the newest Mario Kart, the newest Kirby, the newest Donkey Kong when they come out later this year. And I'm going to play them with ease, without having to struggle to get it set up. So the truth is, when it comes to comparing these two, it's just not as comparable as you would think. While they are, yes, both gaming handhelds, and they are both very similarly priced, as crazy as that sounds. And yes, you can get probably more games for your $80 on your Steam account. A lot of those games are going to cross over to the Nintendo platform anyway. And on top of that, you're going to be able to play the Nintendo exclusives. So if you aren't the kind of person who has a gaming PC, the Steam Deck doesn't even make sense to you. It doesn't make sense as your primary PC. It doesn't make sense as your primary console. But if you are somebody who has a Nintendo account, has your Nintendo games, then the Switch 2 is the thing that makes sense to you. And I'm not going to dissuade you from actually taking a serious look at this thing and thinking maybe it's something you want to take a look at. But I would advise caution. You're not getting into a Switch 2 alternative. You are getting into a Linux computer that just happens to look like a Switch 2. And that is where I'm going to end it today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, consider giving it a like, maybe comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video. Wolfy, out.